think it's early days and probably more people will join, but I would say let's kick this off. So I'll cue the music and we can get started. Okay. Welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to the my first LinkedIn live event. We're going to talk about building an MVP and my tech strategy. Let's get into it. So, MVP. First, some scary statistics. 38% of startups run out of cash, fail to raise more, and go under. 35% do not find the market need. 20% get out-competed, and 19% fail due to a flawed business model. So, it's crucial to find market fit before you run out of money. And I would say, okay, got it. Let's build an MVP fast, right? Fast, but not too fast. You want to do some groundwork first. I like to ask myself, do I have a clear problem to solve? Then do customer research. Is what I think is the problem really resonating with the customers? And then to define a target audience, right? Who are those people having this problem? And then once you have identified that, you've got confirmation from people, yes, this is a problem and we will probably pay for a solution, then you can craft a list of features that you're gonna test in your MVP. But until you get there, the leanest approach is not to build anything at all. It's the step before. So whatever you can test before actually building is saved time on development and saved development costs, right? It's leaner to do research than it is to build something. But at some point you can go no further with just service. So you've identified your problem, you got the target audience, you did customer research, and you now know what you need to test. So you define a feature set that you're going to put in your MVP. Perfect. It means that you are ready. What's an MVP? It stands for minimum viable product, and the key word in MVP is viable. So it's the leanest version of a product that delivers just enough features to satisfy early customers. And the purpose is validation. You did the customer research, but now you need real world feedback, because what people say and what people do are two different things. So people will not, people will say, yes, I would pay for that. It's useful, but until they vote with their wallets, you can't really trust that feedback. So it's good to do customer research. At some point you need to build something, give it to the hands of the users and say, give me your credit card details, and you verify, does this solve their problem? Does it meet their needs? How well does it solve their problem? You verify market demand. And that's a crucial part of why you need to build an MVP, what you cannot do with just research. But there's an important part to it, that validation is not only about the product itself, the product that you're building. It's about your company too. So it's about, and that's often the overlooked part. Can you build a viable company? That's the question. Because if you just build a product that's viable, but then you fail to scale it up, you fail to develop it further, you didn't really do much, right? So it's a crucial point of the MVP is also to learn internally how to set up departments, how to work together, how to iterate fast, how to find problems and then find solutions to those problems so they don't end up bogging up your company, and how to iterate on features so that you are able to continuously deliver impact to the users, but also get feedback and learn and adjust your loop. So now that's all clear, let's go build it. Here are some of the common mistakes that I have seen when companies, startups, teams start building MVP. The first one is not taking a strategic approach to tech. It means that there's always a tech strategy, but sometimes it's going to be implied because of the decisions that you make at the start. Let's say you hire an agency to do it. They have a specific tech stack. They go with that. You get the code, and then you're stuck with this ecosystem. It's not that you don't have a tech strategy. You do. You just didn't get to it consciously, right? Second is neglecting a go-to-market strategy, because if you just build an MVP without that part, it's going to be very hard to transition and think about it. How do we take this to market later? Now we know it's a problem, so it should go hand in hand. Not focusing on internal learning, we just said that is an overlooked thing. Taking on too much tech debt. So this also needs to be a conscious decision, like how much tech debt do we take on, as opposed to just saying, okay, we'll just fix it later. We just need to find a target audience. Lack of focus on core value is another big one. It means that the core value of the MVP is the thing that you built, the thing that you need to test because it doesn't exist. If it did exist, then you would just plug it in and put it into the hands of the users. But this is where you should be focusing most of your efforts. Sometimes teams focus on everything else that's surrounding it and building the skeleton, building the supporting foundation, and not focusing on the core thing. Then it's not validating assumptions. Not validating assumptions, overloading with features. Sorry, I'm getting a message. So not validating assumptions, basically the assumptions that you had and now you built into your MVP, you need to actually verify them with feedback. Overloading with features is a classic one. You want to pack as much as you need to, as much as possible into the MVP, but the M stands for minimal viable product. So you should build it like, there's an analogy where you go from like a bicycle to a motorbike to a car, as opposed to building the individual components of a car, the engine, the frame, the wheels, and then putting everything together at the end, right? That would be the waterfall approach. You don't want to do that. Next one is not owning your assets, basically that somebody else builds the prototype for you and you don't have control over your code. Ignoring user feedback. Sometimes you don't want to listen too much into what the users are saying directly, but it's still a useful feedback. Henry Ford said, if I asked people what they want, I would give them a faster horse. Don't give a faster horse, but still measure the impact. And the last one is scaling too soon. So this is a common setup that I see when teams are starting out. So you've got the company, and then you get a founding engineer or somebody who builds the MVP directly and is hands-on. But you don't do a tech strategy, right? So you just call the engineer who will be building it the CTO. Another one is maybe you don't even have a tech team, right? You just go to an agency and get an MVP. But then again, the tech strategy is kind of what the agency is doing and is implied if you don't have anyone at the company who is strategic and technical. And this is where I come in. The word strategic is the one who connects all the other departments together. The tech team, the product, the marketing, sales, and is able to explain to investors in business terms the impact of the technology that needs to be built, and is able to take values and business goals from the company and inspire the tech team and then develop a plan of how we get there. So let's talk about tech strategy. How do you define one? Now, there are many approaches. This is mine, and it's not the only correct one, but it's a set of principles that I found work well. So let's define them. Number one, technology needs to serve business needs. It means that the incentives between what the business needs, the business goals, and what the tech team does need to be aligned. When they are not aligned, the product is building crazy features, tech team is busy chasing shiny things, sales is busy pushing stuff into the pipeline, and it's a mess. That's the kind of stuff that kills companies. Principle number 2, only build what is necessary and focus on the core domain. So the problem that you're solving, you need tech and engineering, because a solution for that specific problem that you have identified doesn't exist yet. And this is what you should be focusing on building, not doing credit card payment processing. You want a third party to do that. Analytics, data, all of that can be done by third parties, integrate with APIs, get it from the market, even authentication. You can get something like Auth0 and just plug it into your application. So don't spend months building everything around it and ignoring the core domain. Principle number 3, learn to deploy early and often. And this is especially important right from the get-go. Get something to production fast and then iteratively build on that, as we said in the bicycle analogy. Number 4, build a team that builds the MVP. That's a crucial one, because if you sometimes I get companies where there's 2 examples. You say you've got, let's say, an example that I've seen is a company split and one investor took all the code, all the assets, and the other one took the whole team. Which do you think was more successful? A lot of people think that it would be the one who got away with the code, but actually 80% of everything is undocumented when you just have the code. The deployment processes, how everything fits together, how all the intricate connections that are undocumented but live inside the team's collective mind are the actual valuable part. And the team that spent a year building that MVP, who learned to work together well, is able to replicate that MVP even better in a short amount of time. And the one who got stuck with the code will be reverse engineering, trying to find if there's something useful. Probably there was a lot of mistakes made in the first version, so they walked away not with an asset, but with a complete 100% liability. Number 5 is have a tech strategy deliberately defined, one that aligns with your tech choice with the company goals. So that's a conscious choice. It's like, okay, these are our business goals. What's the tech strategy to get us there? Now let's talk about what goes into a tech strategy. I have 10 ingredients, but they're all going to be coming from a business perspective, so I'm not going to go into deep into details. There's 10 things, so don't get scared. I know it's a lot. Just pause here for a second and see how many people we have. Perfect. So let's say that's part. We're now walking into the second part, into the meat of the presentation, and then there's going to be Q&A after. So let's see. Oh, I got one bonus one. The 10 things are team structure, tech stack, software architecture, development environment, deployment process, performance optimization, monitoring and analytics, scalability plan, security measures, and operating procedures. Now let's jump into it. First, team structure. So my approach here is to deliberately plan for the size of the tech team. So if I'm working with freelancers or freelancers agencies, it's really important to form one team. What does that mean? It means that the incentives, the vision, the purpose is aligned. And now that's sometimes hard to achieve because agencies and you have a different, or like freelancers have different incentives, but it's still possible. It just takes some work. No scrum masters in between, no crazy communications channel. Basically, regardless of the form of the contract of everyone has, should not play a role in how they integrate within that team that is building the MVP. And then having a scaling plan of who do we need to hire, resource allocation, what skill gaps do we have, and aggressively give out ownership and accountability so that the developers feel empowered to actually perform. And they need to have a vision of why we're building it and not just a set of features that they go through. Now, red herring here is hiring freelancers or relying on software agencies without actually having the strategic tech plan in-house to make sure that everything, all ownership, everything is done properly. Okay. I'll take a sip of water before we go into the tech stack. So tech stack, that's probably the most popular and the most clear decision to make, but it's often the most overlooked. Usually for the MVP you just go with something that is easy to do, or the first engineer that you get knows, or the agency knows. But it's actually a strategic decision, because once you're stuck in a tech stack, it's going to be very expensive and difficult to pivot out of that if you find that that you made the wrong choice, right? So you should consider team expertise, project requirements, how is the market going, how many developers are available, long-term maintenance, your performance requirements. And here the red herring is to chase shiny things and try out new cool technology. My approach is to use boring tools and use proven tools and choose boring technology. It means something that is simple to use, that you've done before, and that you can get productive in, but also taking into the considerations the things that I mentioned on the left. Software architecture. My approach here is simplify it as much as possible for the MVP, because you probably ain't gonna need it. So a lot of times I see this idea that, of course, our startup or our project is going to be super massively successful, and there's going to be massive scale, and we're going to have performance problems, so we need to go with microservices, and we need to break everything up and add caching. That can come later if you structure your application in a good way and you are able to deploy and improve as your needs grow. So I say here, go with monoliths before microservices, and lean on third-party providers, but try to avoid getting locked into a cloud, over-engineering in this first step where you're trying to just get a feel for how well your product solves your customers' problems. The next big one is development environment, and I see, and this is my passion. I really believe this should be super simple. It should be git clone a repo, Docker compose up, open code folder in Vim, if you know how to exit it, or your code editor of choice, and it should be that simple. Everything should just work out of the box, and pretty much every project that I came on to had a complicated manual development environment setup, which made it difficult to onboard new people. It was difficult to work with, and there's never time to actually invest in it properly. But I say that's not true, because it's not that difficult to set up, but it can really make the quality of life of your development much, much greater. So that's one of the first things that I fix, is make the dev environment super simple to use. Let's talk about deployment, another big one. You want to make it fully automated. In 2023, you've got a full tool belt at your disposal. I cannot imagine like how we did it 15, 20 years ago, copying code by hand with FTP. And unfortunately, some people still do that. or at the start they don't plan for continuous delivery, so they don't have any automation. But again, it's not that difficult to set up. In 2023, you've got GitHub Actions. You use feature flags, you push to master, and it should just run the tests, deploy, and the new version should go live. And then that's the basis of your ability to be able to improve your MVP regularly in the hands of the users without building this shiny thing for 6 months in a basement and then having a grand launch that you cannot repeat. Let's talk about number 6. So we made it over the halfway mark. I'm gonna take a sip of water here. Here, again, it's important to be as lean as possible. So if you just, how I usually do it, just Postgres for everything, Redis for everything else, and make the interface itself fast, because probably you ain't gonna need that much performance that soon. So you should ask yourself, like, what scale am I realistically expecting, and how fast can you scale, right? But things that go wrong in these stages, as developers, we love to imagine all the things that could go wrong, and we start doing premature optimization, putting caching on everything. But that's the wrong stage. You don't know what will blow up yet. You don't know what you need to develop. You should be testing things with the users, and if you're optimizing something that you're going to end up discarding, that's wasted effort. Next, let's talk about monitoring and analytics. So my MVP approach here is, again, Pareto principle, like 20% effort, 80% result. Don't go overboard with it, but have something, right? Integrate something to catch front-end errors. Have an uptime monitor, super simple to set up. Have a server monitor just to make sure that everything is working properly, and set up your alerts. And the red herring here is leaving it for later and treating your users as the monitoring tool. You should not be getting a message from your users that there's downtime and that something is not working properly. Something should ring a bell before that happens. Let's talk about scalability. I touched briefly upon it when we were talking about the software architecture, but my approach to scalability is just keep buying. If you're at the cloud provider, just keep buying a larger instance until you can't, and use VPS providers. Like now you have one of the things I really like is Linode plus Docker, because you can just scale your VPS instance quickly, and if you have Docker running on it, it's super easy to deploy. Nothing changes when you add more performance to it. Have one single database with a backup that you just increase the size and performance of, and you can do performance optimization and scaling on both sides, right? You can improve the code, like identify the bottlenecks, improve those, and scale on the other hand. And if you balance both, then you're able to grow into 10,000s, maybe 100,000s of users before you even need to start planning for some different architecture. But even then, you can just take the part that's the most resource intensive and the slowest, and just cut that out of your whole, instead of going with a full microservice approach from the start, right? And here it's really good to be aware of cloud provider costs. What they do is they tend to give you a nice free package that you burn through. Like you get free credits because you're a startup. You burn through those credits, and then the bill kills your startup. Let's talk about security measures. So you want to use third party for any payment processing, like lean as much as you can on proven third parties for all payments, everything. Don't store anything sensitive that you don't have to. Absolutely have to use third parties for that. And my MVP approach here is to keep the OWASP top 10 in mind. use automated pen testing tools, scan your software for vulnerabilities, properly secure servers. Just, again, you don't need to go crazy if you're not having really sensitive data in your application, like medical data or something like that. But still, properly secure your servers. Limit accesses, that's a big one. Just don't give like root access to everyone in the company, and define processes who has access. If something goes wrong, if somebody needs to do manual intervention, how does it work? Document everything. And again, Pareto principle, don't invest too much in it, but the red herring is ignoring security because it's just an MVP. That's how you get hacked. Let's talk about the last one, and then I'll give you a bonus, which is operational procedures. Now, again, it's an MVP, so don't go too crazy, but the basics needs to be covered. Like, how do you respond to incidents? How do you manage downtime? What are the operating procedures if you need to do manual interventions, right? Backup and recovery, security protocols, change management, how do you do docs and knowledge sharing? And it's good to at least think about it, and it's difficult to do that because in the MVP process, because there's so much else to do. But the red herring is not taking any operational procedures in mind and thinking through potential disaster scenarios and having to come up with an incident response on the spot. You don't want to be in that position where a junior drops a quite important table in your database and you don't know how to recover it, which did happen to us once. So, as a bonus, tools and assets. So, it should be always own all assets: code, deployment, dev environment, service keys, cloud storage, and only grant access to third parties when required, so never full ownership. Keep a list of the services and tools that you're using. And also big one is like when new people are joining the company, what's the process like? What kind of accesses do they get? Keep a list of all those accesses. And then a big one, remove the access when they leave. Like that's one of the biggest security holes, is not taking away access when somebody leaves the company. And don't, like that way nobody can hold your code hostage, nobody can hold your server keys, your deployment, your cloud storage, and you own everything like you should. Now that's been my tech strategy. If you would like to work with me, I have a 1-hour tech strategy session. It usually goes for $299, but I'm giving 50% off for anyone who watches this. If you just DM me MVP, we can set that up, and then after the tech strategy, we define what would work for your specific case, and then if you decide to work with me, we'll define a longer term support strategy for you so that you can have the strategic guidance in your tech that you need. Or if you just want to say hi, go to my Calendly, book a 15-minute meeting, and I look forward to meeting you. So thank you for listening to this presentation. I appreciate everyone who took the time and came to my first live stream. I consider it a big success. Just setting everything up and making sure that everything works, doing the presentation has been a massive learning experience, and I plan to do this regularly from now on. So I'm excited that this went well. And now I would love to hear your questions. Let's make it interactive. Yeah, Nico, tell me. Okay, we have two questions. Nico is still writing, but Dennis asks, low code versus no code on an MVP. I'm not a fan of. Okay, same questions. I'm not. I'm not a fan of no code solutions for your MVP because, I mean, it depends again on what you're trying to build, but usually it's going to be really hard to scale that up. And if you need a solution that's, you're focusing on a problem that hasn't been solved that yet. First of all, like, no code is not so much no code. You still need to learn all the intricacies of the framework. So the trap there is, it looks easy, but when you want to go into building more advanced features further down the line, at some point you will need to pivot out of that. So I'm a fan of low code solutions for your MVP and actually building that in code, and especially if you can afford it, right? If you have a team of developers who are skilled, don't go for a low code solution. Maybe that for no code solution, maybe that's an intermediate step before you actually build an MVP. But for the MVP, I would say definitely write code. Okay, let's see. Let's do one more question. You're welcome, Juan. I'm glad that you joined. Do you have any questions? What did you like? Let's go to the full screen. Okay, it's taking some time for these questions to come in. So, and if I'm looking off screen, it's because I have all of you on the other screen. So. Nico drops the bomb. That's one of the biggest questions, and it's about there's two sides to this. First of all, the temptation is there to add as much features as possible, because a lot of the times businesses, if you don't have, it's gonna take a little bit more to break that down. So if you don't have a clear idea of the target audience that you have, and you haven't done the necessary customer research to find your target audience and clearly define the problem that you're facing, what happens is that you have a very broad set of users that said, hey, I want this thing, I want another thing. And if those users don't overlap with their problems, what ends up happening is you want to add a feature for this user, a feature for that user, a feature for that type of user, and then your whole product doesn't work until everyone from that profile is satisfied. So product sometimes has a tendency to try to put as much features as they want in, and it's important to push back on that because it's called the minimum viable product, and you should identify the smallest code that you have that solves a problem for a specific audience and makes a real impact in their life, right? In their workflow. And that's hard to do, but really important. And maybe you will get it wrong. That's why it's important to start small, identify those core features, and you do that by talking with product, talking with marketing, doing customer research and identifying what problem are we solving and which features do we need to develop, like what's the minimum amount of features that we need to develop in order to put that in the hands of the users and get real world feedback. And then once you do that, that's your MVP feature list. You want to go live with that as soon as possible. So, if you take 6 months to build it, you probably, your assumptions were probably wrong. And you will only know after 6 months. So if you can do it in 3 months, the feedback loop is tighter. That's why it's important to start small. And it's better to start releasing, but it's difficult because sometimes the problem that you're solving is quite complex. So it will take some time to be effective. That's the trade-off, right? It's about finding a value for the users. I hope that makes sense. If you wanna, we can go deeper into it if you wanna learn more about that. Okay, let's see, is there any more questions? Yeah, at the start I was talking about the prerequisites. So, like identifying the problem that you're gonna solve, right? Having a good target audience, doing the customer research. Like all of those are prerequisites before you start building, and they're very important. In each topic could be not just a presentation, but a whole course, right? How do you define the problem? How do you find the target audience? How do you do customer research? How do you know what to test? How do you define a feature set? And those are all foundational things to building the MVP, and the temptation is there to just jump in and start building something, because especially if you come from an engineering background, that's what we love to do. We love to build, so we jump into it, but a lot of the times we can learn a lot without actually building, Like a famous example is Dropbox just created a web page, described what the feature list is, put a link down below and said, get notified when it's live, but they didn't have anything built yet. They just got so much feedback that from real world customers that they knew, okay, it makes sense to build it because the demand is really there. We identified a clear problem, cloud storage, they identified who it's for, and that's how they tested it without actually building anything. Building something is really expensive. So if you can get away without building something, I always say, the first question should always be, can we test this assumption without having to build something? And if the answer is no, but it's still important that we know, then you say, okay, it's a feature, let's build it, let's deploy it, put it into the hands of the users, get their feedback. I can see there's still people on the stream, so let me know. Are there any more questions? We can go into any of the topics that you discussed, or it can be anything else connected to tech or strategy. I'm here live now, so if you have any more questions, go for it. So Juan writes, as you may remember, I come from a marketing and sales background, and I find it interesting that you mentioned the importance to build a team that builds the MVP. Since I do not have that tech background nor have a team yet, how can I build a low-code MVP? I'm aware of your preference, but I guess I have to start somewhere. Okay. Yeah, that's a very good question. And you know, I'll answer it with a with a question that's gonna probably annoy you. It's like, why do you need to build an MVP, right? Because an MVP is just a step on the way to product market fit. And of course, you know, it's about finding. Sorry, I got lost in the chat and my train of thought popped off. So yeah, as I said, like doing the groundwork is really important, like problem, target audience, customer research, and then to actually build an MVP, it's important to do all the other steps that are prerequisites, and then you find somebody technical, like Dennis said, right? Like a technical co-founder, you work with a fractional CTO, or somebody who is able to identify it from the feature list that you have identified, what can be built, what's difficult to build, and what's the best approach to build it. But it's again comes from a point of like, why do you want to build it? You know, what assumptions do you want to test? I think that's a really important question. And then finding a technical partner where you can discuss, okay, what do we need to build, and what assumptions can we test without having to build code? And yeah, for sure, for some things, you know, I'm not categorically against no code solutions. Sometimes it makes sense, just not for the type, usually not for the type of projects that I like to work on. But if you don't mind giving a little bit more background of the MVP that you want to build, it's also worth seeing what stage you're in. Or if you would like to discuss it privately, I'll be also happy if you book a 30-minute intro meeting and we can talk more there. Any more questions? Yeah, thank you all. Thank you, Juan, for joining, and of course everyone else who is on the stream. Um, I'm happy that everyone found this useful. I'll wait one more minute if there's another question from the audience, and then I'll wrap up the live stream. You're welcome, Nico. I'm happy that you found this useful. Okay, perfect. Hi, Bogdan. Yeah, it's gonna be recorded, so you will be able to watch it later. Okay, perfect. So it looks like there's no more questions. I'm really happy that you all came to my first ever live stream on LinkedIn and YouTube. It's gonna be also there. I hope you found something from here useful. If you want a short intro session with me and work with me, you know where the links are. You can visit my website, and it's a series that I'm gonna start doing regularly. I'm gonna have different topics, but most of them will be from a strategic CTO perspective. And probably we will break down a lot of those things as well, because my interest is not only uh, in leading teams, it's also in connecting business and technology together, so that the engineers themselves have a product vision, they understand the business case for it, and I think that's really important, and that's what I'm gonna break down in further sessions. Is how can you get to a company where the engineering and business and product are aligned and working on the same page to deliver products to people that make an impact in their lives and are fun to build. So thank you again for joining, and I hope I'll see you next time too. Take care.